The Beast with Three Backs. Montreal. All nights are cold in Montreal. Last time I was here was in the spring, for the first Duran-Leonard fight, and the downtown streets were like sheet ice. Harold Conrad was dancing crazily in an after-hours club on St. Catherine Street, and when we went outside for some air, a French whiskey sot and a Z28 Camaro ran over two people in the narrow street outside the club and then tried to flee. But he panicked and crashed into a bread truck, and an outraged mob chased him down and whipped him until he confessed. There was no need for police until later. I was part of the mob, for some reason, along with Bill Murray and Bob Abram, and a dozen or so punk rockers shouting things like "Bastard, Bastard," and "Jacques." Nobody knows who did the actual beating, but I'm sure it was none of the fight crowd, although Aram later tried to take credit for it, and Murray had blood under his fingernails for the next 2 days. "I tripped on the curb," he explained. "All I remember is clawing at the legs of people running over me." Nobody believed either one of them, but in the end it made no difference. All memories are gray when the time comes to start sorting out details of mob violence. The truth is, we had gone temporarily wild like the others, behaving like beasts, and borne along by a frenzied crowd. And in fact, there were no real injuries, not even to the original hit-and-run victims. The only certified loser was the driver of the bread truck, who had his whole load of croissants scattered like popcorn all over the street. But that was a long time ago, and we have all become older and wiser since then. Even Sugar Ray Leonard, who lost to Duran in Montreal, then redeemed himself in New Orleans a year later. This time I was in town for very different reasons. The underlying theme was still violence, but now it had to do with Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, and the threat of nuclear war between the United States and Russia. That seriously worries the Canadians, and whether Richard Nixon would become president in 1988. This was the subject of talk, and I was scheduled to deliver the next day at Concordia University, and I was met at the airport by a student committee of two, Doug and Terrence. Terrence is bright and ambitious, but he is cursed with a dark and twisted curiosity that all too often characterizes Canadians. I've forgotten that trait since my last trip across the northern border, but it only took a few minutes with Terrence to remind me. In the course of our conversation, on the way from the airport, I mentioned to him that I was to leave from my job as night manager of the O'Farrell. This piqued his interest more than anything I'd said, and he insisted we pay a visit to Montreal's foremost adult theater to compare style. Like any responsible administrator, I agreed to go and check out the competition. Club Super Sex is located at 696 Street, St. Catherine, just down the street from the place where Conrad had spun into his dance frenzy on my last trip. According to my colleagues who run the Super Sex, there are 80 dancers on the roster, but there were only about 20 still working this late on Thursday night. There was something unsettling about the crowd, which consisted of major pimps and boyfriends, wild-looking Canucks with 14-karat gold chains and black biker sweatshirts with chopped-off sleeves, and the dumb, nervous eyes of animals who sense they're in trouble but don't quite know where it's coming from. There was also something unsettling about the dancers, which was so foreign I felt I should bring it up with the natives, just to be sure I wasn't ignorant about some bizarre Canadian tradition. "Is it fatigue hysteria?" I asked. "Or does that woman have hairy legs?" "Well, yeah," Terrence said without much of his usual conviction. Just about that time, a woman came to our table and offered to dance. Montreal's watered-down version of lap dancing. Terrence quietly declined, and when the woman was a safe distance from the table, I leaned over and in a desperate whisper said to him, "Ye gods, another woman with hairy legs." "No, you're mistaken. Take off your dark glasses," he said. "Don't lie to me, Terrence," I said. "The woman has hairy legs. I have not been in the business for this long for nothing, and my eyes at this range are like those of a snow falcon. Do all Quebec women have hairy legs?" He pretended not to hear, and it was just as well. It was 2:55 a.m., the last dance, and I knew from my professional experience the girls were in the dressing room packing their things, eager to get home, and nobody was in the mood to discuss issues of hygiene. Montreal is a strange city. It was built about 400 years ago on an ice-bound island in the St. Lawrence River by renegade Frenchmen who thought they had found the New World and would soon own it. This has not come to pass, or at least not yet, according to the hard rockers who speak for the Free Speech Quebec Separatist Party, who identify mainly with the IRA, Puerto Rican nationalists, and the ghost of Chiang Kai-shek. But they say it will happen soon, that the long screw of history is still turning and the war is not over yet. As far as the French separatists are concerned, with any luck at all, Reagan will go belly up when he meets Gorbachev in Geneva this week, and Washington will be seized by a cabal of crazed generals in the style of Dr. Strangelove. The Colossus to the south will be paralyzed by fear and greed, paving the way for a takeover by truffle-eating, wine-sucking anarchists. It was a hard and irascible attitude to deal with when I went up on stage the next day to answer all the obvious questions about the U.S.-Canadian political position vis-a-vis the Kremlin and the 1988 election. It was a long afternoon, but finally a consensus emerged. Canada is doomed to the status of a nuclear chattel, regardless of what happens in Geneva. Reagan will use the summit conference as nothing more than a flag-waving update of his TV commercials for GE in the good old days, and the winner book favorite to win the 1988 election has to be Richard Milhous Nixon. I left for the airport immediately, feeling lucky to get out of the country without being flogged. November 18th, 1985.